Ideology was one of the driving forces, one of the very big driving forces of competition between the capitalist camp and the free world led by the United States and the communist camp led by the Soviet Union. However, ideological confrontation wasn't the only driving force of the new Cold War geopolitics. There were two more, and now we will discuss the second one, which is the new military technologies. The new military technologies included three main components: air power, nuclear weapons, and missiles. The first, air power, significantly changed relations between the countries. Previously, in the times of traditional geopolitics, airplanes were not considered as something potentially valuable. You remember that in the times of traditional geopolitics, states were much more focused on competing for some distant regions, on competing with each other to control certain strategic points. With the development of airplanes, distance between even very far points in the world map became much shorter. For example, the Soviet Union and the United States, there is a very long distance between these two countries. However, with the use of airplanes, this distance became shorter, and the ability of these countries to project their power became much broader, meaning that the United States, the Soviet Union, as well as their allies could project their power in much more places in the world. The second factor was nuclear weapon. Nuclear weapon was developed in the end of the Second World War. It was used twice by the United States, and it has shown its ability to massively destroy your opponent's infrastructure, people, buildings, and so on. So this new weapon of mass destruction became another factor of geopolitics and influenced how states looked at each other. In the times of traditional geopolitics, let's repeat it once again, it was very easy to see it in a certain place somewhere in London or in Moscow or in Washington, D.C., and to think about what points in the world political map you should control in order to become more powerful. With the development of airplanes, as well as with the development of missiles that could easily cross continents and could carry the nuclear weapon, the very homeland of every of these competing countries became extremely vulnerable. And the sense of insecurity came to every place in the world, including the two superpowers competing with each other. And that, of course, changed their geopolitical worldview. They continued to struggle for power. They continued to struggle for control over important strategic points. But in the very same time, they should think much more about their own security, about how to protect themselves on the one hand, and how to contain or deterrence your opponent on the other hand. The concept of deterrence became the continuation of the containment geopolitics. So the idea wasn't only to stop spread of influence of your opponent, but also to show to your opponent that you can easily destroy him in any place of the world. The new world political maps started to appear like this one, with the North Pole projection that actually showed that the United States and the Soviet Union, which were far from each other in the traditional political map, were really close to each other if we look at the globe. And they could easily threaten each other with the use of airplanes, missiles, and nuclear weapons. And of course, a story of late 1950s, early 1960s should be mentioned here as a very good example of how this new deterrence geopolitics was used by both centers of power. In the end of 1950s, the United States decided to locate their missiles Jupiter in Turkey, which was their ally. And the very fact of location of these missiles in Turkey threatened the security of Soviet Union because, as you see, these missiles could easily reach many places in the former Soviet Union, including its capital. The response of the Soviet Union was quite logical one, quite rational one. The Soviet Union decided to use the very same geopolitical concept of deterrence and to locate its own missiles somewhere near the US borders. And the choice was Cuba, which was by those times a communist state, an ally of the Soviet Union. And this decision made by Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev caused the situation that is well known as the Caribbean crisis. The situation when both countries were ready to start a nuclear war against each other, and it was diplomatic power of main government officials that allowed both countries to prevent this nuclear war. The Caribbean crisis is very interesting and very important for us because it actually shows this new geopolitical logic, geopolitics of deterrence. On the one hand, every country can use these new technologies, air power, nuclear power, and missiles in order to protect itself. On the other hand, in the very same time, this country can use these technologies to deter its opponent, to threaten its opponent, to to participate in geopolitical competition with its opponent. And this was another example how geopolitics became much closer to the realist worldview and to the understanding of the world as a closed system where states were much more focused on balancing each other, on the balance of power between them, rather than on simple struggle for certain points somewhere far from their homeland. All points, all strategic points, all places in the world that were very important for these countries, they were just part of their competition, which included now the necessity to protect your homeland, to ensure security of your own country. So the first two distinctive features tell us a lot new about the classical geopolitics, the Cold War geopolitics. The ideological competition determined why states decided to compete with each other, why they contained each other, how they divided the world into us and them. The new military technologies tell us how the states contained each other, what instruments they used, and the new military technologies also changed significantly the logic of geopolitical competition, making domestic security much more valuable and important for the geopolitical competitors. The question appears, if these changes made the traditional concepts of geopolitics like geographic or strategic places, trade routes, resources less relevant? Obviously not. Resources, trade routes, certain geographic points, they remained extremely important for the competing powers. However, the understanding of what is important and what is not obviously changed.